Welcome to Tank Talks, your personal think tank for startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. This week's episode is a conversation I had on Clubhouse with Aaron Upright, co-founder of ZenHub, a Vancouver-based startup that was spun out of the incubator Axiom Zen, which is also famous for starting Dapper Labs, the creators of CryptoKitties and NBA TopShot. On today's talk, we discuss Aaron's journey starting ZenHub as a bootstrap company and the challenges he faced along the way with limited capital. Aaron shares the lessons he learned about overpromising and underdelivering, and the struggles of balancing the need to remain solvent versus growing at all cost. We ask Aaron to share his views on raising venture capital funding after holding off for so many years, and what worries Aaron the most about keeping ZenHub going now that they have been backed by institutional investors. This Tank Talk really helps you get an insider perspective on when to bootstrap versus taking on venture capital investment. Now let's get into this week's episode with Aaron Upright, co-founder of ZenHub. Welcome to the Tank, Aaron, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. Really excited to be here.
Well, let's kick things off with today's topic on going from bootstrap to venture back. As was recently reported in TechCrunch, along with other news publications, ZenHub recently raised a $4.7 million seed round, co-led by ourselves, Ripple Ventures, and BDC Capital, along with additional angel investors, including Adam Gross, former CEO of Heroku, Joanna Zhang, VP of Product at Webflow, and Oji Udezi from Calendly. But before we dig into the specifics on ZenHub, I would love to hear about the origins of starting inside the Axiom Zen incubator alongside other emerging startups like Dapper Labs and what that experience was like for you.
It was a really interesting one, and I think really non-traditional compared to how most venture-backed startups kind of get their start. Back before ZenHub was ZenHub, like you mentioned, we were all working at Axiom Zen, and a lot of the work that we were doing at the time was on client-facing projects. And so oftentimes we'd work with Fortune 500 organizations or high net worth individuals or family offices to create product experiences for them where they either didn't have that product and engineering capacity in-house or maybe didn't have product and engineering teams. And so we were always a very product and engineering centric company. And as we were working on a lot of these client projects, one of the things that we started to realize pretty quickly was that there was this growing tension and friction between our product and engineering organizations where our developers felt like they were constantly being pulled outside of where they were working to have to update these different project management systems that we were trying. And without those updates, our product managers really felt like they were kind of flying blind on our projects in terms of progress and blockers and things that we really needed to get back to our clients with. And it was becoming a real point of tension in our company, so much so that one of our developers actually went away over the course of a weekend and hacked together a really simple Chrome extension to bring the concept of a task board into GitHub. And even within a few days of kind of implementing that as an approach to project management, our process almost completely changed. We found our developers were way more engaged in providing updates in a more timely manner. We found that our product owners had way more accurate insight and updates into our projects that they could then pass off and deliver to our clients, and it was resulting in a way better experience for everyone. And so this idea for ZenHub really came out of this kind of need that we had internally as we were building products for other customers at the time and clients to really get better at our project management process. And the rest, they say, is kind of history in terms of commercializing it and bringing it to market. Obviously, there's a ton of work that's involved in that, but very, very much a scratch your own itch product from the beginning.
And how long did it take for you to see that aha moment when that, developer came back with the Chrome extension completed and tied into your GitHub library?
I mean, our process used to be at the end of the day, unfortunately, to have to go and bring our developers into a meeting room and ask if everyone had given their updates and to even manually do that sometimes. And I think it was the first couple of days of using that, we found that the amount of shoulder tapping and needing to bring people together in a room to facilitate those conversations had gone down just dramatically. And so it was within a couple of days that we saw engagement like we'd never really seen before from our developers. And that was really powerful. That's kind of what led us to really double down and say, okay, this is something we want to use internally. We're already seeing kind of use and behavior changing out of this, which is really kind of important in what we were looking for. So
that's amazing. I remember at my last startup, I would walk by, I was the sales guy. So walking by the engineering team and they would be standing in a circle, doing their weekly scrums. And you could just see how uncomfortable it was for these engineers having to provide their updates and, finger pointing left and right, standing face to face. And I felt like all they wanted to do was to prove their progress through data rather than using like English language to explain how far or behind they are or something. It seems common sense.
Yeah, and the thing is, no project manager or product owner likes having to go around and ask their development team for updates. Like I haven't met a single product manager that enjoys that part of their job, and it's unfortunate that it still has to be done in a lot of organizations. But I mean, it feels bad to go walking around a room and constantly distracting people and pulling them outside of what they're working on, or tapping them on the shoulder so they can take their headphones off and give an update. So it's kind of a lose-lose for everyone when that happens.
Gotcha. And so, you started in the Axiom Zen incubator, and what was it like kind of working on this project among all the other projects you had going on? How did you guys kind of come to think about this as a potential standalone Chrome extension or even app?
We had a history in DNA as a company of, once we kind of came up with these ideas, trying to see if there was any commercial opportunity behind them. And so, we did what a lot of companies do. We took a really simple approach of just throwing up a landing page and seeing if we could get other companies engaged in a beta program. And some of the first few signups that we had were teams from NBC Universal and Sony and Microsoft. And we even had a team from Jet Propulsion Labs that reached out. And it was at that point, I think we realized that we were onto a problem that a lot of organizations had at scale, and that this required, not only required, but was worth a lot more time investment than we were kind of giving it as a side project at the time to just fix an internal problem that we had.
Wow. And maybe just for the audience to understand, how does the Axiom Zen incubator actually work, as an early employee that you were there? What's it like being kind of a part of a bunch of different things going on?
Yeah, it's changed a ton over the years. And today it's not nearly what it was kind of 6 years ago when I first joined and when we created ZenHub. The idea by bringing together a lot of people, a lot of smart people in the same room, and having half their energy and attention focused on client and kind of consumer projects and half the energy focused on prototyping rapidly these ideas, was that we could take learnings from one project and failings sometimes from one project and be able to quickly apply them to another project. One of the benefits from that model that the founder of Axiom Zen, Roham, I think really mentioned and that resonates with me is that so oftentimes, startups bring amazing people together. The ideas sometimes fail. They fail to get capital or to raise money. And then all those great people that you brought together that work really well together and have found ways to be really productive together go off and join other companies. And so you lose that talent and that investment that you kind of made in bringing everyone together and getting them to work cohesively. That's obviously not every company. Sometimes companies fail because of the ways that they do work together or fail to work together. But a lot of the time, it's, the idea is not quite ready or the market's not quite there. And all these really smart, talented people who are used to working together go off and then join other companies. And we had this hypothesis that, more often than not, we're going to fail when it comes to these product ideas that we have. But if we can keep that same core group of people together to kind of rapidly test and iterate on different ideas that we have, either ones that come out of internal frustrations or pain points that we have as a company, or opportunities in the market that we see, at the intersection of emerging technologies or emerging markets, we can potentially have a really powerful impact beyond just one single company and kind of multiple shots on goal, I guess you could call it.
Well, that goes to the testament of what, Roham created to keeping people coming back and staying motivated to work on more and more complicated problems, even if the market wasn't ready to adopt them. Especially like early on when people saw CryptoKitties, people thought it was absolutely crazy, to keep motivating people to stay with it and see through the future. That must have been a great learning experience for you up until today and beyond, for you to even motivate your employees as well, who may not be, excited about some of the things you're building, but can see the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it keeps you thinking in a very future focused way as opposed to getting stuck on the problems that so often come day to day when you're trying to build a startup, because there's no startup out there that hasn't struggled in different ways. And at the end of the day, you can take a step back and put together a great press release and talk about all the success, but it comes with a lot of challenges. And like you said, I think it is a true testament to Roham's ability in the early days to keep everyone motivated, but also inspiring as a founder, now to look back on that and to want to do the same thing with the group of people you brought together to tackle the mission and vision that we see at ZenHub, because there's tough days like any company, but there's also an incredible opportunity here and an incredible opportunity in the market to do something really different. So that's really exciting for us.
So let's talk about probably the most exciting thing any founder ever experiences, which is signing your first ever paying customer. So who was your first ever paying customer and how did that all go down?
I actually had to look back on that. And the day that we actually opened, there was the 10 initial customers that came on board. So when we built our payment system, we had a lot of teams that were actually using our product in beta. And those teams on the day that we opened decided to commit to paid plans. NBC Universal was actually one of those first teams, which was really cool. And like I said, 9 others that were a little bit smaller in scale. But that one in particular, I think, was really cool because that was a very visible company that you can kind of name drop very easily and people recognize. The other one I thought that was really cool as well as our first on-premise customer was Jet Propulsion Labs, which is pretty fantastic as well and pretty rare, I think, that you get to work with such a cool customer in such an early stage of your business. They were actually one of our first enterprise leads as well. And it was such a great time working with them because they were so appreciative of the fact that we were trying to build the plane as we were kind of heading down the runway with our enterprise product and super involved in helping us beta test and giving us feedback along the way. And we built such a great relationship with them that when it came time to kind of transition into a paid customer, they were right there with us and super supportive of what we were doing and really eager to actually start paying for a product that they had been beta testing and giving feedback on for the past several months.
That's amazing. So instead of hitting one sales gong, you got to hit it 9 times on your first day of actually closing customers.
Yeah, it's kind of the beauty with the self-serve motion is that we very intentionally designed our flow to be that way. It wasn't until a little bit later on that we started to get a little bit more mature around our go-to-market motion and really build some sales capacity. When I say sales capacity, myself jumping into a lot of those conversations, but from the get-go, we tried to make it as frictionless as possible for people to get into our product. And if people wanted to purchase licenses for our product to unlock the features that we had even further, giving them opportunity to do so really easily.
So you started with the Chrome extension, and then you moved to the enterprise on-prem, obviously, because more enterprises require that. But what were the initial thoughts around only supporting GitHub versus other developer platforms?
At the time, GitHub was where we were working. And so it was a really natural decision to integrate with GitHub because obviously it supported our workflow. But as we thought more about developer ecosystems, I think it became really clear to us that GitHub would be the dominant player for a few reasons. The first one, I think, is this concept around network effects. The more people that use a platform, the more valuable it becomes. And we saw with version control and source code management that this is really something the entire team has to get on board with. You can't have half a company using GitLab and half a company using GitHub. It just doesn't work. It's kind of like Slack. It's like if you had, multiple messaging systems inside a company, it would be terribly difficult to get in touch with the people that you wanted to get in touch with them at any given time. So that network effect was something that was really powerful. And GitHub was the leading company at the time. And we recognized that, because of their head start, I think, in that market, that it would be a worthy investment to make. The second point I think that's really interesting around why we hypothesized they would be the dominant platform is this idea of marketplace dynamics. GitHub coined very early on this idea of social coding and really went to own the open source movement. And because of this, it became this really natural choice for a lot of developers because there was this kind of free code marketplace that was emerging of all these open source repositories and projects that you could either pull code from if you wanted to use or contribute to in some way. And so that, I think, was another really powerful aspect of that platform. Later on, one of the things I think that became very powerful as well was this idea of really supporting the ecosystem. And I think to GitHub's credit, they've really realized the value of a best of breed approach when it comes to creating an ecosystem, as opposed to some of the other companies out there. I think GitLab and Atlassian are very much of the mind that they want to own the entire experience from end to end. And while it's a valid strategy, it makes it very hard to be the best at every single thing. And I think GitHub learned that very early on, that they wanted to be the best in source code management, version control, and social coding, but empower and work with the best partners and build a great ecosystem, to support all the other parts of the software development lifecycle that they knew they maybe couldn't be the best in, or that they didn't have a very strong opinion in.
Yeah, it sounds like one, you guys were living in GitHub, and so you wanted to eat your own dog food on where you were living and breathing. And then also there was an alignment with like the mission and the ecosystem that they were building, which perfectly aligned with what you wanted to build at ZenHub. So that makes complete sense. Now the big question everyone wants to know is, did you ever try to raise external financing in the early years, or did you always have this mindset of going bootstrap for, the first couple of years?
Yeah, I think in the very early days of the business that we certainly had a mind towards that. But, it seemed that every time we talked with institutional investors, the feedback we would hear time and time again was that, ZenHub is a feature. It's not a product or not a solution. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we were a pretty simple task board in GitHub at the time. And we really started to get a lot more deliberate about our roadmap and really built an end-to-end solution that went beyond this simple task board and really addressed pain points that not just developers have, but the entire team has. And by the time we had kind of built that solution and built this team tool, we were already really seeing some strong indicators of growth. And I think that pressure to go out and raise capital didn't exist in the same capacity at that point in time, because we were able to support our growth a little bit better through the customers that we were bringing in at the time and the revenue that we were actually creating. I'll also say that some of the investors that we were talking to in the very early days, because we were still in the mindset of formulating our product roadmap and our vision for where we wanted to take ZenHub, really didn't seem like a good fit for the company. They didn't have a great thesis around the space. They didn't really understand the product. And as a founder and someone who's part of a founding team, I think that's a pretty big red flag, because if you're going to give up optionality and add a lot of governance and process to how you build product and build a company, you want to make sure that you're partnering with the right people. And obviously, we really found that with Ripple and BDC, and that really influenced, I think, us to take funding a lot more seriously when we were able to find the right people that we wanted to bring around the table, as opposed to people that were willing to maybe give us money or that wanted to give us money but didn't really understand where we were going or have a strong opinion on our space.
Well, I mean, we're happy that you absolutely waited for someone like Ripple to come along. But, in those early years, it must have been really hard to balance the need to remain solvent versus growing at all costs. So how did you do that? And what sort of help did you get from Roham and the team at Axiom Zen?
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously some capital support, but I think being self-funded really forces you to be focused in your approach, because you simply just don't have the bandwidth and you can't afford to be working on multiple things at the same time. And I realize in saying that it's a double-edged sword, because we'd always love to be working on more and fixing multiple problems at the same time. But I think in the very early innings, in the very early days of a startup, on the other hand, doing less is sometimes more. And when it's clear to everyone what's being worked on and what's important and what the focus is, you can sometimes move a lot faster and avoid these distractions that come up of other things you should be working on or other features you should be building, other areas of the business. I should also mention too that as we were building this in a self-funded way, we also had a very healthy inbound flow of leads, because at the time, and we still are, we were built into a platform and an ecosystem in GitHub that was growing at an incredibly fast rate. And so this actually allowed us, I think, to push off some of the hires that most businesses and startups traditionally need to make in the early days, like marketing, sales development, business development, to a little bit later time in our company life cycle, because we had that really healthy inbound flow of high impact teams that were coming to use our product. And so we were really able to focus our hiring and our resources on design, development, and product to try to accelerate our roadmap as quickly as possible and get more customers that way, as opposed to having to make some of those critical hires that maybe companies that don't have that inbound flow don't have the luxury of not making.
Well, that sounds like you were kind of like the miniature fish that attaches itself to, the massive great white shark, being GitHub, and just kind of mooching off the stuff that comes through. But it really does help and work when you're a bootstrap company, because if they're leading the way, leading the charge in the ecosystem that you're selling to, why would you invest in educating the market through marketing resources and things like that if they're doing all that for you? It seems like a natural fit for, how a bootstrap company should align itself. And I think that's really great advice maybe for other bootstrap entrepreneurs out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I realized that, if I were to go and do this again, or if it were a different business, we might need to think about things in a slightly different way. But that was, like you mentioned, something that really worked to our advantage in the early days and allowed us to build the business in the way that we did, because we had, the benefit of being built into another platform and having kind of a really solid foundation because of that when it came to demand generation, lead generation, like you said, some of the education that we would otherwise have had to do in the market. And so it's definitely something, I think, as you're evaluating an opportunity as a potential founder or as a potential startup, definitely something to think about that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good advice. I think we'll make sure we share that with a lot of founders we meet with, that it is important for you to align yourselves with the giants in the industry and not look at them as direct competition, because they can provide a lot of benefits when you don't have the resources necessarily to spend on marketing and sales. So let's talk about those resources, because, you had some limited resources to spend. You put them all towards probably product development. So did you find it difficult to recruit great talent without having a well-known venture-backed startup and a good, finance raise to share and recruit people, especially being based on the West Coast in Vancouver, competing against everyone up and down, the Pacific Northwest and eventually the Valley? It must have made it pretty difficult to recruit talent, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think without that kind of venture-backed brand, it definitely made it a lot harder to get great talent coming to us inbound. But that just meant for us that we had to get creative and we had to get better at building our process, our hiring process, in a way that when we did find the right candidates, or when we did have those candidates eventually show up, that we could get them to a close really quickly. So in some ways, it was actually a forcing function for us to look inward at our process and try to get a lot better actually at how we brought people on board. In the early days, we did a lot of outbound work going out to talent that we thought could be really additive to our team. And we did a lot of selling to those people, because it wasn't, apparent that we were going to be successful because we had a brand name stamp on our company and some funding behind us. We really had to work to sell the mission and sell the vision forward. Referrals were also a really key part of how we built our team. Great people always seem to know other great people, and we heavily incentivized our team to bring in referrals in the early days. If you can build, this is another kind of maybe tip or piece of advice. If you can build a kind of internal referral flow and incentivize your team to go out and find other people that they've worked with in the past, or people that really impress them in the space, and make it lucrative for them to reach out to those people and to try to convince them to be brought into the business, that ended up working really well for us. And we spent money internally to do that, but we ended up finding a really high caliber of talent, because we were bringing in people that other people had had great experiences working with in the past, or really respected in the industry. And sometimes it's even as simple as asking, hey, we need more people like you. Who are the best people you've worked with or have a ton of respect for that you'd love to work with again? As a founder, I think it also just involves a lot higher commitment and a lot more selling, because you got to be on the phone with a lot of these potential hires to really paint that vision. If you don't have press and you don't have that external validation from, the venture community, you have to do a lot of that yourself in order to get people sometimes excited about the mission and the vision of where you're going. But I think the really powerful thing that comes with that is alignment. Tyler, who's our CEO, still speaks with every new hire that we make. And because of that, everyone who's coming into our business is aligned with our mission, our vision. They understand our challenges. They understand our opportunities from day one, which I think is something that's really important that we keep up. In fact, our goal is to do that for the first 100 hires. And I think after that, it's going to become a little unsustainable, but there's so much value for founders and for CEOs and members of the executive team to stay super involved in the hiring process and sell kind of forward that mission and vision to every new person that's joining the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard Elon Musk used to do that as well for all the hires at SpaceX. He used to meet with all the hires beforehand, and I completely agree with you. But what's some sort of the incentives that you had going on for the referrals? Like, was it cash incentives? Can you provide some details on that?
We tried a couple of different things. I think we found that cash just ended up working best because it was the easiest to kind of give out, and the most kind of the easiest to kind of conceptualize. We had tried to do things of, hey, if you bring in great people, we'll not bonus the entire team, but create a great party, or maybe an internal event or something around that. But we found that people just ended up being a lot more motivated by cash, which was totally fine. Obviously you have certain cash constraints as a self-funded business, but I would rather pay for someone that we're really excited about to bring in great talent than to try to be conservative there. The other side is, if you do this well and you figure it out in a way that avoids you having to use kind of outsourced recruiters or sometimes outsourced talent, that can also end up costing a lot of money and eating up a lot of cash as a self-funded startup. And so we were actually able to put off using a lot of outside recruiters and outside talent help, because our internal team was so motivated to go out and share the jobs within their network, go get in contact with people that they really respected and wanted to work with. So that ended up working really well for us, even though it was a little bit of a cost.
It is the best way to recruit internally, because the people who are champions of your company internally know what you're looking for, know your mission statement and vision, and they typically find the best friends that they can bring into the fold. And it usually works out quite well. I remember at my last company, the internal recruiter we had tried to sell us on like a $2,500 referral bonus that could be used towards an all-inclusive vacation down to like the Bahamas. But really, it was just a cash payment. But he was telling us what you could buy with the money that he was going to give you, which I thought was a very funny way of showing, other aspects of the referral bonus. So let's move on to talking about the actual capital you did raise with ourselves and BDC, as you mentioned. What was the impetus to seek out raising venture capital funding after holding off for so many years?
When this pandemic first really hit, I guess a year ago now, and when people really started to first feel it, we made this point to speak with as many of our customers and our users as possible to understand how their businesses and to understand how what they were working on was being impacted. And what we heard time and time again was that businesses were under more pressure to do more, to produce more with less resources. They were being asked to move faster and be more efficient without access to more human capital and more financial capital. Companies were going into hiring freezes. Some companies were drastically reducing headcount, but the need to deliver on the same product roadmap and product commitments stayed the same. That never went away. And so despite all this pressure to move faster and be more efficient, a lot of these teams we were talking with really lacked the knowledge and understanding to work faster and become more agile. And that was within our customer base and even people that we had talked to outside of our customer base that said, hey, we suddenly now have to do twice the work in half the time. How do we work faster? We don't have a framework for how we do that. And I think that's where we saw a massive opportunity to use ZenHub to help those teams and to leverage automation to help teams work in more agile ways so that they could deliver faster. And as I think about our goal, as a company, our goal with automation, it isn't to just automate simple tasks in our products so that when you move something from column A to column B, something else happens, if this, then that style automation. We truly want to help teams tackle some of the most complex and time-consuming parts of Agile and augment the experience in a way that helps them get better through our product and through automation. That pressure combined with the increase in demand that we were already seeing for ZenHub brought on by the pandemic really pushed us to take raising outside capital a lot more seriously than we had in the past, because the urgency was there, and we knew that we could continue down the path of being a self-funded business, but that would reduce the overall impact that we could have in the market in really changing people's workflow and improving the way that teams worked.
That's really interesting. I feel like companies are always kind of gut checking their sales pipeline and their customer health just for the health of their own business, but using it as a way to gut check what use of capital would look like and whether or not there is even a need for your product more before going out to raise is a really, really interesting and efficient way to pre-check the market before you go out to raise capital. And so I love that. And I think, that's what brought us, into the fold as well and got us really excited was that there were, a ton of layoffs, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, but teams were being asked to do more with less in a distributed remote world, hence why a product like ZenHub made a ton of sense and we think has a ton of room in front of it. But maybe, talk to us about the opportunity in front of you guys now. So you raise the money, you're putting it to work, you've got, a ton of feedback from your customers. How big is the opportunity in front of you guys right now?
I mean, I've never been so excited about the feature as I am now. And I think you have multiple market trends that are coming together to create this kind of perfect storm. Or you could say there's multiple waves that we're kind of riding here in terms of the market. On one hand, and this is not something that's new or novel, you have every company becoming a software company, and software teams have never been more mission critical to the success of an organization. Even recently, you have companies like Ford that are coming out and publicly denouncing themselves as an automotive company and rebranding themselves as a tech company because they want to differentiate from other car players on the market based on their technology. We work with a team at GE Appliances that builds washers and dryers, and to them, the most important thing in their entire device is the silicon chip and the embedded software that comes in that. So if that doesn't tell you that every company is becoming a software company, I don't know what is. And that's a major trend that is still continuing to this day, and that is a really important market shift. On the other hand, we talked about that pressure for teams to produce more faster and needing help to do that, and needing better frameworks to do that. Another huge trend that we see that's happening is just even the growth in GitHub and software development is a practice. By 2025, GitHub thinks there's going to be 100 million developers in the world, and there's 54 million developers today. So you think about that population more than doubling in the next 4 to 5 years. it's an incredible amount of new software developers that are going to be exposed to project management for the first time and need better ways of working and better ways of doing things. And so all of these trends, I think, add up to a massive shift that's happening in the market. And I think we have this opportunity in front of us to create really, I think, a new category here around automated project management that really focuses on empowering the team and saving the entire team time.
Yeah, I mean, we completely agree also, but I'd love to hear about some of the customer use cases that are expanding your market, your TAM, that you never thought would be using ZenHub for, that are maybe potentially new markets that you could enter into. Have you seen any really interesting use cases?
Most of the use cases that we still see are in software development. We do see teams in maybe tangential areas, whether it's hardware development or data science, that are successful with our product. We from time to time see teams that are using our product in a way that, maybe they're a product marketing team, or we even have teams that are using it in kind of a legal capacity and using the boards to actually prioritize what they're working on, especially if they're working on technical contracts. Those are all really cool examples, and I love to see our product being used in kind of non-traditional ways. But what I really love is seeing those teams that are struggling with Agile, they're struggling to get organized, they're struggling to feel like they're in control of their projects, that are starting to use our product. And the feedback that we're getting from them, or end up getting from them, is that they feel like they're way more in control and have a way better understanding of not only what they're working on, but what their kind of delivery timeline and schedule is for that. And so, I would say the big shift for me is that we're seeing a lot of brand new teams to Agile, and we are kind of now becoming the entry point for those teams into Agile, as opposed to these teams otherwise being, independently knowledgeable about these practices and coming to our tool because it kind of is the best feature fit for what they're looking for. So that's a pretty cool transformation that I've seen that I think is really, a great indication of the impact our product is having, that we're going beyond, just checking the boxes from a feature perspective on what really knowledgeable teams need. And we are now becoming that tool that introduces people to a better way of working.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that agile mindset in the engineering capacity is starting to make its way throughout all the parts of the organization, whether it's sales, customer success, even HR or legal. Like everyone's trying to become more agile, more efficient, more productive. And tools like ZenHub, I think, have a huge ability to help them achieve that because a lot of people just don't know where to start. So what worries you most about keeping ZenHub going besides capital now?
This is a classic problem, I think, in transitioning from being a self-funded or bootstrap business to a venture-backed one. It's, scaling your culture. And as the team grows, it's something that I'm really mindful of. When you're self-funded and you're growing at a moderate to rapid pace, I think it's culture is something you can really have control over. And as you scale very rapidly, and we're looking to kind of double our headcount this year, it's something that we now have to be very, very intentional about. We've invested a lot into our company culture to get it to where it is today. And it's definitely something that I don't want to lose or give up on or compromise on as we scale. Yeah, I'm of the mindset that our culture should always be evolving, but we, like I said, need to be very intentional about how we build our culture going forward and make sure that we prioritize the right things for our people. For example, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that's really important to me and on a lot of people's minds these days. We need to get a lot more intentional, a lot more thoughtful, I think, on how we're building programs around this. And for me, what that really adds up to is I never want to miss out on an awesome hire or a super talented individual because they don't think they'd be a welcomed fit within the culture that we've built. And so that's something that's really important to me. The flip side of that keeps me up is, keeping that bar really high for talent. And I don't think if we're not precise or if we're not thoughtful about who we bring into the organization, it can create these negative downstream effects of those people then going on and bringing in other people into the organization that aren't like-minded and don't share our values and our mission and our vision for the future. And you can very quickly end up in a situation when you've grown as a company, but you find yourselves with, people on the team that don't share in that culture or that don't see the vision the same way. And so on one hand, we're working really hard to build and scale the culture and make those investments. On the other hand, we're also working really hard to avoid compromising on hires and hiring too quickly to the point where we have people that aren't aligned with where we're going as a company and aligned with our values as a company.
Yeah, I think those are going to be problems for a very long time. I think bootstrap companies and public companies are always facing those cultural problems. But it sounds like you guys have a great vision on how you're going to handle that as you evolve. So many people aren't really aware of the Vancouver startup ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about how the developer ecosystem has changed, since you kind of got started at Axiom Zen, and what sort of Axiom Zen and ZenHub and Dapper Labs has done to maybe lift up the ecosystem over the last couple of years?
I think for one, it's become a lot more competitive and a lot more mature. Like you're seeing larger and larger companies that are coming into Vancouver, and I guess you could say into Canada in general, and pulling talent away from these smaller companies. Fortunately, I think that actually ends up hurting the ecosystem. A lot of people actually see these big companies come in and like see them in the headlines that Amazon is moving into a city and get really excited about what that means for innovation. And I guess I see it a bit differently because people tend to get pulled away from smaller companies where innovation's really happening to go work in these larger organizations. And there's sometimes this talent drain that happens from small companies and innovative startups as people get pulled into larger and larger companies. And so one of the ways, because we're really conscious of this, that we're getting around this is by really expanding our horizons past Vancouver to other areas of Canada, other areas of the world, and kind of less traditional markets. In fact, none of our most recent hires have actually been in Vancouver. This is also something I think you asked earlier in the conversation, is it's been difficult to hire without having that venture-backed brand. As you go from being, co-located to being remote, that's something now that I think we've really benefited from, being able to put, the venture-backed stamp on our business, because as you go into markets where people maybe haven't heard of you, or you're not a household name, or, they haven't tangentially heard of you from friends or acquaintances, having that market validation really does help to get people's attention and to get people, the right people's attention as well. And so that's been something that's actually been really helpful as we've raised this round. We've been able to really leverage that to go into markets where we don't have a lot of presence, and bring in some world-class talent and interest some world-class talent. We've also had to be really intentional about building, as we've thought about going outside of Vancouver. We've had to be intentional about building a remote-first culture. And the number one thing that we want to avoid as a company is having these stratified layers of culture based on where people are. For example, I don't want people in Vancouver to feel like they have a better experience or have a worse experience than our remote employees. And so that's just something we've have been really intentional about, as well as we see the Vancouver market for talent really changing and it getting more difficult to specifically focus all our energy and attention on Vancouver as a single ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I'm glad that Ripple is able to help play a small role in getting awareness out there for your company, because you guys are incredibly talented and I have no doubt going to be extremely successful. I think that's a problem though a lot of companies face. You always have a HQ that has the after hour socials and company events, and then the satellite offices don't really get to buy into that culture. And now with everyone being remote, I think there's going to be a huge gap in the market on how to build culture and get the same experience felt across the organization, whether someone's in Europe, Australia, or in Vancouver, all at the same time. And I think that's going to be a big problem that someone's going to hopefully figure out how to solve, because I don't think it's going away and only getting bigger.
I wish I had the answers for it too. I don't know how to solve that problem at scale. Like I said, I wish I did, but one of the things I do know is that it's going to require a lot more involvement that we were giving it today. And so that's where we very intentionally went out, and as we made commitments around building this remote first culture and building a remote first company and trying to hire the best talent regardless of where they are, bringing in people on our talent and HR team that could support those efforts, so that it wasn't something we were doing off the side of our desks or an afterthought for us as a leadership team as we were building a business. It does require a lot of serious energy and focus to be able to do this well. And so we really kind of ramped up our hiring efforts on bringing in HR and talent folks into our business that could really help us build that boundaryless culture moving forward, and make sure that we were really serious about it and deliberate as we were building it. So
that's awesome. Before we wrap things up, we always like to ask our guests for any book recommendations.
I've read a lot of business books, and I'll be honest, I tend not to make my way through them fully, because it's a lot to go from working day to day and experiencing those problems to then reading about other people who are having those problems. So recently I've tried to branch out a little bit and get into things that are a little bit tangential from the traditional kind of business books. One that I really love, though, that's tangential enough, I think, is called The Fish That Ate the Whale. And it's a really cool kind of nonfiction book about a individual named Samuel Zemurray who moved to the United States in the early 1900s and ended up really building a fruit empire and changing politics in Latin America based on banana trade. There are some interesting business lessons, I think, to be learned in it, but it's also a really fun read to see historically how people have kind of built businesses. And he's not a very common character, I think, in most people's vocabulary or in most people's historical reference. And so it was a really cool book to read for that reason as well. So yeah, that's the Fish That Ate the Whale. I can't recommend that enough. Is a really fun read.
That's awesome. Yeah, we love the non-business books here in the tank because, it's nothing better than taking a break from the day-to-day grind on a business and, supercharge your mind with someone else's experience in a different world that you probably never would have heard of until you picked up that book. So thanks for that suggestion. And thanks for joining us in the tank today to talk about going from bootstrap to venture-backed with Aaron Upright at ZenHub. Thanks for joining us, Aaron.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And make sure to give me a follow on Twitter or Clubhouse if you want to be in the audience and ask a question on our next Tank Talk. Until next time,